September 28, 2024. A woman walked into a police station in Utah and reported her husband missing. According to her, he had left voluntarily. He needed time alone. He told her not to call him, not to look for him. At first, there was nothing unusual about the story, until investigators learned something she never expected them to find. 6 days before she reported her husband missing, she was already talking about him as if he were dead. And that wasn't the only problem. Detectives would soon discover a bedroom that smelled strongly of bleach, a mattress that had mysteriously vanished, a truck abandoned only blocks from home, and a secret lover who claimed Jennifer Gledhill had confessed everything. What happened inside that $1 million home would shock an entire community and leave one question hanging over Utah for years. What really happened to Matthew Johnson? Because even today, despite murder charges, despite recordings, despite a mountain of evidence, his body has never been found. This is the case of Matthew Johnson and Jennifer Gledhill. From the outside, the Johnson family looked like they had everything: a beautiful home in Cottonwood Heights, 3 children, financial stability, and a husband respected by nearly everyone who knew him. Matthew Johnson wasn't just another suburban father. For more than a decade, he served with the Utah National Guard Special Forces Group, a Green Beret, the kind of soldier trusted in situations where mistakes cost lives. Friends described him as calm, dependable, disciplined, the kind of man who never sought attention but earned respect wherever he went. His wife, Jennifer Gledhill, appeared to live a very different life. A stay-at-home mother in her early 40s. Quiet, reserved, dedicated to raising their children to neighbors, they appeared normal, happy even. But appearances can be deceptive, because behind closed doors, the marriage was already collapsing. Court records later revealed that by mid-2024, divorce discussions had become impossible to ignore. Arguments were becoming more frequent, trust was disappearing, and both sides were preparing for a future that no longer included the other. What nobody knew at the time was that events had already begun moving towards something far darker than divorce. Because while Matthew was trying to find a way out of the marriage, prosecutors would later argue Jennifer was considering a very different solution. And within weeks, one decision would place the couple on a collision course from which there would be no return. By the summer of 2024, the marriage was no longer simply unhappy. It had become hostile. At least that's what Jennifer Gledhill would later claim. In August, she filed for a temporary protective order against Matthew. The filing painted a picture of a woman who feared her husband, a woman seeking legal protection. On the surface, it appeared serious. But when the case landed on the desk of a Utah court commissioner, something unexpected happened. The evidence didn't support her claims. The commissioner reviewed videos Jennifer herself had submitted. He reviewed text messages. He reviewed statements from both sides. And the conclusion he reached would later become one of the most discussed details in the entire case. According to court records, the videos did not show a frightened woman trying to escape an abusive husband. Instead, they appeared to show someone willing to engage in confrontation, someone who was not backing away, someone who seemed comfortable escalating conflict. The commissioner also noted text messages Jennifer had sent Matthew, messages he described as demeaning and belittling. Not the words of someone desperately seeking protection, but the words of someone actively fueling an already toxic relationship. Then came the decision. September 16, 2024. The protective order was denied. No abuse had been proven. No protection would be granted. For most couples, that ruling would simply mark another ugly chapter in a failing marriage. But years later, many people would return to one particular line in the commissioner's ruling, a sentence that now feels almost haunting. He wrote that the couple appeared trapped in a deeply dysfunctional marriage that should have ended in divorce long ago. At the time, it sounded like ordinary legal commentary. Today it reads like a warning, because only 5 days later, prosecutors say Matthew Johnson would be dead. And if that allegation is true, then September 16th wasn't merely the end of a court case. It may have been the moment Jennifer realized divorce was no longer the outcome she wanted. She may have wanted something permanent, something final, something from which Matthew could never walk away. But before investigators would ever examine a crime scene, another troubling detail emerged. Matthew himself had begun to fear something. Not a courtroom, not a divorce, his own home. Witnesses later described a heated argument inside. The first signs were subtle, at least to everyone except the people closest to him. Friends noticed Matthew seemed exhausted, distracted, more cautious than usual, not fearful in the way most people imagine, just uneasy, as though something didn't feel right, according to several people who knew him. Matthew had begun spending nights away from home. Instead of sleeping in his own bed, he sometimes stayed at a National Guard facility for a Green Beret accustomed to danger. That decision raised eyebrows. Soldiers are trained to recognize threats, and many of Matthew's friends later wondered whether he sensed one growing inside his own marriage. Retired Guardsman Kevin Thompson would later describe a man who had finally reached a difficult conclusion. The marriage was over. There was no fixing it, no rebuilding it, no saving it. The next step would be divorce. A painful process, certainly, but one that would allow both people to move forward. Unfortunately, prosecutors believe Matthew never got that chance, because while he was preparing for life after the marriage, investigators would later uncover evidence suggesting Jennifer was already involved in a secret relationship, an affair, and according to court documents, it was more serious than anyone realized. The affair wasn't simply emotional. It wasn't simply physical. It would eventually become the foundation of the state's entire murder case. Then came another strange moment. 2 days before Matthew disappeared, Jennifer allegedly showed her lover something unusual, a handgun, loaded, ready to fire. At the time, he reportedly thought little of it. After all, this was a military household. Firearms weren't uncommon. Nobody could have known that investigators would later view that moment very differently. Because when detectives eventually reconstructed the timeline, that handgun appeared to take on an entirely new significance. Then came September 20th. The final night Matthew Johnson would be seen alive home. The details remain disputed. But prosecutors believe the confrontation centered on one explosive revelation. Matthew had discovered the affair. For months, the marriage had been cracking. Now it appeared to be shattering completely. What was said during that argument may never be known. What happened afterward remains even more mysterious. Because by the following morning, Matthew Johnson was gone. No goodbye, no phone call, no explanation, just silence. And according to prosecutors, the events of that night would trigger one of the most extensive murder investigations Utah had seen in years. But at that moment, nobody outside the house knew that. Not friends, not neighbors, not police. For nearly a week, Matthew's disappearance would remain hidden behind a story that sounded believable. A husband taking time away. A husband who needed space. A husband who supposedly didn't want to be contacted. The problem was that story was about to collide with reality. And reality would begin with something investigators could smell the moment they stepped inside the house. Bleach. A lot of bleach. Nobody knows exactly what happened inside the Johnson home during the early hours of September 21st, at least not yet. What investigators have built is a timeline made from phone records, GPS data, witness statements, and the story prosecutors believe those pieces tell. The evening of September 20th had already been tense. According to witnesses, an argument had erupted inside the house. Not a small disagreement. Not the kind of argument couples forget the next morning. Something bigger. Something emotional. Something that may have changed everything. Prosecutors believe Matthew had recently learned about Jennifer's affair. If true, the discovery would have destroyed whatever remained of the marriage. For months, both sides had been discussing divorce. Now betrayal had entered the picture, as night fell over Cottonwood Heights. Neighbors went to sleep believing nothing unusual was happening. Inside the Johnson home, however, prosecutors believe events were unfolding that would never be fully reversed. Sometime during the night, according to allegations later presented in court, Matthew Johnson was shot while sleeping. One gunshot. No warning, no chance to defend himself if that allegation is true. One of Utah's most respected soldiers died in the place he should have been safest, his own bed. The house remained quiet. No emergency call, no ambulance, no frantic attempt to save a life. Instead, prosecutors believe something very different began. A cover-up. Hours passed. Morning arrived, and Matthew Johnson effectively disappeared from the world. His phone stopped behaving normally. His vehicle would later be found abandoned. Nobody heard from him again, Yet strangely, nobody reported him missing. Not that day, not the next day, not even the day after that. For nearly a week, the man simply vanished. And according to investigators, every hour that passed gave someone more time to erase what had happened. The question was no longer whether Matthew was missing. The question was what had happened to him after the gunshot, and investigators believe the answer was hidden inside the master bedroom. September 28th, the same day, Jennifer finally reported Matthew missing. Detectives entered the Johnson home. At first glance, nothing seemed dramatically wrong. The house looked clean. Maybe too clean. Then they noticed the smell. Bleach, strong, fresh, unmistakable. Experienced investigators know that bleach isn't always suspicious, but when someone has recently disappeared, it immediately raises questions. The smell appeared strongest in the master bedroom. And the deeper investigators looked, the stranger things became. They observed reddish-brown staining on walls, on window blinds, on sections of the wooden bed frame. Some stains appeared to have been partially cleaned. Others appeared hidden beneath fresh cleaning products. Then detectives noticed something else. The mattress looked brand new, not recently cleaned, brand new. It seemed completely out of place. A family home shows signs of daily life, wrinkles, wear, indentations. This mattress showed almost none. It looked as though it had recently been delivered. That discovery triggered an obvious question. Where was the original mattress? No one could produce it. No one could explain where it had gone. Investigators would later learn that the original mattress had disappeared shortly after Matthew vanished, and it has never been recovered. To this day, nobody knows where it ended up, or perhaps more importantly, what evidence may have disappeared with it. The missing mattress became one of the most significant mysteries in the case, because prosecutors believe it may have absorbed the evidence of a killing. If true, removing it would have been essential, but replacing it created a new problem. Every attempt to hide evidence leaves behind another trail: receipts, deliveries, phone calls, financial records. Investigators simply had to find that trail. Meanwhile, more evidence continued emerging. Cell phone records showed Jennifer's phone traveling during the early hours of September 21st, not remaining at home, traveling. GPS data pointed investigators toward locations north of Salt Lake City, the same general area where prosecutors later alleged Matthew's body had been buried. Then came surveillance footage that would become another major problem for the defense. According to investigators, cameras captured Jennifer spending a significant amount of time at a car wash late at night, cleaning her vehicle, inside and out, at an hour when most people were asleep. Individually, none of these details proved murder, but together they formed a pattern: bleach, missing mattress, abandoned truck, destroyed phone, GPS movements, late-night vehicle cleaning. Every piece seemed to point in the same direction. And then the investigation took an unexpected turn. Because the most damaging evidence wasn't hidden in a bedroom, it wasn't buried in the wilderness, and it wasn't found by detectives. It came from a man Jennifer trusted. The man she never expected would walk into a police station carrying evidence that could destroy her entire story. Her lover. For days, investigators were building a circumstantial case: a missing mattress, a cleaned bedroom, a destroyed phone, suspicious GPS data. But there was still one major problem. Nobody knew what had actually happened inside that house. Then everything changed, because a man walked into a police station carrying information that would transform the entire investigation. Jennifer Gledhill's lover. Until that moment, detectives were searching for a missing husband. After that moment, they were investigating a murder. The man arrived with screenshots, messages, recordings, and a story that directly contradicted Jennifer's version of events. According to court documents, he told investigators something extraordinary. Jennifer had confessed. Not months later, not after an arrest, not after police pressure, almost immediately. According to prosecutors, the confession happened on September 22nd, just one day after Matthew was allegedly killed. Close to midnight, Jennifer reportedly arrived at the man's home unannounced. What she told him would become the foundation of the state's case. She said Matthew was dead. She said she killed him. And according to his account, she described exactly how it happened. The details stunned him. She allegedly told him Matthew had been shot while sleeping. She allegedly described moving the body, cleaning the scene, disposing of evidence, and burying him somewhere investigators still have not located. The lover later said something else disturbed him. It wasn't just the confession. It was how calm she appeared while giving it. No panic, no tears, no visible shock, almost as though she were discussing an inconvenience that had already been solved. Then he noticed bruises, marks on her body. When he asked where they came from, prosecutors say Jennifer gave an answer he would never forget. She allegedly said she received them while burying Matthew. At that moment, fear replaced disbelief, because if what she was saying was true, he was sitting across from someone who had just admitted to murder, and according to investigators, that fear led him to make a decision that would ultimately become the most damaging evidence in the entire case. He started recording. The recording wasn't made by police. There was no interrogation room, no detectives, no legal warnings. Just two people speaking privately, one terrified, the other allegedly unaware her words were being preserved forever. According to prosecutors, one of those conversations occurred at 11:47 p.m., and what Jennifer allegedly said during that call would later shock even experienced investigators. The lover told her he was frightened by what she had confessed, frightened by the possibility that she might be capable of hurting someone. Her response, according to court filings, was chilling. Rather than expressing remorse, rather than denying what she had said, she allegedly minimized the concern entirely. Then the conversation became even stranger. Investigators claim Jennifer began speaking about Matthew as though he were no longer a person, not her husband, not the father of her children, not a human being, an obstacle, a problem. Something that had been removed. At one point, the lover reportedly asked her a simple question. What if the situation were reversed? What if someone had done this to her? Would she be afraid? According to prosecutors, her answer was immediate. Only if I deserved it. The statement would later appear in court documents and media reports across the country. But the most bizarre moment was still to come. Jennifer allegedly began describing what she believed was a past life. A life in which she compared herself to the Queen of Hearts, a ruler known for executions and beheadings. According to prosecutors, she described eliminating what she viewed as undesirable people she referred to as the scum of the earth. To the man recording the conversation, the statements were deeply unsettling, but what made them even more important was timing. These conversations occurred before Matthew had even been reported missing. Think about that. The world still believed Matthew Johnson was alive. His friends believed he was alive. His family believed he was alive. The National Guard was trying to locate him. Yet according to prosecutors, Jennifer was already speaking about him entirely in the past tense, as though she knew something nobody else knew, because she did. The lover preserved everything, the recordings, the messages, the screenshots. For several days he remained silent. Then on October 2nd, he handed everything to police. In that moment, the investigation changed forever. Detectives no longer had only physical evidence. Now they had something potentially far more powerful. A confession, or at least what prosecutors believed was one. But despite how devastating those recordings appeared, Jennifer's legal team wasn't ready to surrender. Because they had one argument that changed everything. A simple argument. One that every jury would eventually have to confront. Where is the body? By now, prosecutors believed they had assembled a compelling case. A missing husband, a troubled marriage, an affair, a suspicious timeline, a cleaned crime scene, a missing mattress, GPS data, a destroyed phone, and recordings that appeared to contain a confession. To many people, the case looked overwhelming. But courtrooms do not operate on public opinion. They operate on proof, and Jennifer Gledhill's defense team immediately focused on one fact that could not be ignored. Matthew Johnson's body had never been found months past. Search teams combed through remote areas of northern Utah. Volunteers joined law enforcement. Friends searched. Family members searched. Former Green Berets searched. Still nothing. No remains, no burial site, no recovery, no forensic examination, no official cause of death. And according to the defense, that changed everything. Because while prosecutors could tell a story, they still had to prove it. Defense attorneys argued that the state's most powerful witness was also its most problematic one, the lover, the same man who participated in the affair, the same man who waited days before approaching police, The same man whose testimony became the backbone of the prosecution's narrative. The defense did not necessarily claim he was lying. Instead, they asked a different question. How much of the state's case depended on believing him? If jurors doubted his account, even slightly, what remained? Then came another challenge: the physical evidence. Yes, investigators found signs of cleaning. Yes, they found stains. Yes, a mattress disappeared. But according to the defense, suspicion is not proof. Had every stain been conclusively identified? Had every piece of evidence been directly linked to Matthew Johnson? Or were prosecutors asking jurors to connect dots that had not been fully connected? Those questions remain at the center of the legal battle. Because in criminal court, possibilities are not enough. Certainty matters. Beyond a reasonable doubt matters. And that standard exists for a reason. No matter how suspicious a case appears, no matter how emotional the allegations become, every defendant begins with the presumption of innocence. Jennifer Gledhill has pleaded not guilty to every charge. As of today, she remains accused, not convicted, and until a jury reaches a verdict, that distinction matters. Yet the investigation did not stop with Jennifer. As detectives followed the trail of the missing mattress, they discovered something unexpected. Financial records allegedly showed that a replacement mattress had been purchased through Jennifer's mother. Cell phone records allegedly placed Jennifer's father in communication regarding the delivery and removal of that mattress. Investigators also learned that Jennifer's parents had spent hours inside the home during the period. Prosecutors believe evidence was being removed. Eventually, both parents were charged with obstruction of justice. Not murder, not conspiracy to commit murder, but helping cover up what prosecutors believe happened afterward. Even that development failed to answer the question everyone wanted answered. Where is Matthew Johnson? Somewhere in the mountains, deserts, or wilderness of northern Utah. Investigators believe the answer still exists. Somewhere, they believe, lies the final piece of this mystery. A husband, a father, a soldier, a man whose disappearance transformed an ordinary suburban home into the center of one of Utah's most disturbing criminal cases. And perhaps that is what makes this story so haunting. Not simply the allegations, not the recordings, not the affair, but the absence. The empty space where answers should be. Because despite years of investigation, one thing remains unchanged. Matthew Johnson has never been found, and until he is, some questions may never be fully answered. Was this a carefully planned murder, or a case built on assumptions and circumstantial evidence? Will the recordings convince a jury, or will the absence of a body create reasonable doubt? Those questions now belong to the courtroom. But one thing is certain: a family was destroyed. 3 children lost their father. A decorated Green Beret vanished without a trace. And a case that began with a missing person report has become a mystery that continues to haunt Utah to this day. The trial is still ahead. The verdict has not yet been written, and somewhere out there, the final chapter of this story may still be waiting to be discovered. If you were sitting on that jury, what would you think? Do the recordings and evidence convince you that Jennifer is guilty, or would the lack of a body leave you with reasonable doubt? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want updates when new developments emerge in this case, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Because this story isn't over yet.